Look closely. At the edge of a fading strip mall, past the cracked pavement and the dollar store sign, there it is. A circle of faded red paint. The spectral outline of a logo that was once a promise. For millions, this isn't just a deserted storefront. It's a monument to a colossal corporate failure. A tombstone for a company that sold us the future, but forgot to buy one for itself. That company was RadioShack. They had 9,000 stores. They employed 21,000 people. They were a household name for decades. But one morning, it just closed. How does an American retail icon, a pioneer in 3 technological revolutions, simply dissolve into irrelevance? We at Tech Fails are going to uncover the full extent of this financial and cultural tragedy. This is a deep dive analysis into the greed, the arrogance, and the agonizing human cost of a corporation that actively chose the slow, painful death of stagnation. We are going to find out what went wrong. The rise, the tinkerer's paradise. The story begins back in 1921. 2 brothers, the Deutschmans, opened a small shop in Boston for ham radio operators. It was a solid business built on specialized knowledge and a specific niche. The real revolution, however, came in 1963, when Charles Tandy, a leather goods magnate, took over. Tandy's vision was simple, brilliant, and utterly transformative: to put a RadioShack in every neighborhood. His strategy was masterful. These small stores were everywhere, keeping overhead low, and they were stocked with exactly the capacitor, the cable, or the obscure resistor you needed right now. This created a sense of urgency and convenience. Tandy also invented retail loyalty through the genius of the Battery of the Month Club. It wasn't about the free battery. It was a psychological masterstroke that guaranteed a customer walked through your door every single month. Then came the late 70 seconds. The moment RadioShack became a giant, not just a parts store. While Apple and IBM were still conceptualizing, RadioShack launched the TRS-80 personal computer. Affectionately nicknamed the Trash 80, it was a complete system you could buy off the shelf for under $600. For a brief, shining moment, RadioShack wasn't just selling technology. It was defining the American tech landscape. This period was the foundation of their success, but it also masked a critical flaw, an internal culture of not invented here. Their obsession with their own private label brands, like Realistic and Archer, was highly profitable. However, this success made them arrogant. They didn't feel they needed to stock the big names because they believed their customers belonged to them. This arrogance would prove to be a tragic liability later on. The scandal, the siren song of greed. The 1,990 seconds brought the first seismic cracks. Big box stores like Best Buy and Circuit City arrived, armed with sheer scale. They offered endless brands, lower prices, and a shopping experience RadioShack's tiny footprint simply couldn't match. Suddenly, why buy a Realistic stereo when you could compare Sony, Pioneer, and Kenwood under one roof? But the ultimate catastrophe wasn't the big boxes, it was corporate greed. The company became dangerously addicted to mobile phones, a high-margin, short-term fix. For a few years, they were a dominant national seller. But the executives at headquarters, blinded by those short-term quarterly profits, made a catastrophic strategic blunder. They agreed to become mere middlemen. They sold the physical phone, but the lucrative service belonged entirely to the carriers like AT&T and Verizon. When the mobile market matured, the carriers asked themselves, why are we paying RadioShack a commission? They cut the middleman out, slashing the subsidy payments. The well of instant cash dried up, and RadioShack's single most profitable category evaporated almost overnight. This pivot was not just a financial misstep. It was an act of corporate self-sabotage that destroyed the company's very soul. The decimation of culture. The deep dive analysis into the management teams of the 2000s reveals a company in full-scale panic. They were led by a revolving door of CEOs 7 and 9 years who had no idea what went wrong. They were too busy chasing the next quick fix. This period is littered with the corpses of internal technology scandals and failed projects, like the short-lived RadioShack branded PDAs. The corporate strategy committed the final unforgivable sin. They actively abandoned their core customer. The true heart of RadioShack was the tinkerer, the expert, the hobbyist who needed a specialized component. But the new retail model forced a painful change. The passionate employee who knew the difference between a diode and a capacitor was replaced by a minimum wage worker. This new staff was pressured, shamed, and sometimes yelled at to aggressively push high-margin phone contracts and extended warranties. They were driving out the very people who gave the stores their reason for being. This was the moment the human element was betrayed. The soul of the company was outsourced to a high-pressure sales playbook. Employee morale plummeted, and the customer experience turned toxic. The fallout, the invisible enemy. Then came the invisible, unstoppable enemy, the internet. E-commerce, personified by Amazon, didn't just compete with RadioShack, it rendered its entire business model obsolete. Why drive to a strip mall only to find the item is out of stock, sold by a disengaged employee? You could find an infinite selection of components at a lower price and have it delivered the next day. The company's final years were a portrait of denial and mismanagement. They were losing millions a quarter. The stock plummeted from nearly $77 a share to mere pennies. They were desperately bleeding cash and needed to close thousands of unprofitable stores. But this is where the corporate failure became truly devastating. Lenders, who had provided a critical loan, actually blocked the closure of stores. Why? Because the stores themselves were collateral for the debt. The lenders essentially mandated that the company keep its life support system plugged into a failing body, not because it was good for the business or the workers. They did it to preserve the value of their debt. It was a final, damning sign of technology scandals where the interests of the corporate financial elite were prioritized over the survival of the business and the livelihood of its employees. In 2015, the inevitable Chapter 11 filing came. 21,000 employees were left adrift. Their loyalty, their expertise, their passion, all reduced to a footnote in a massive bankruptcy filing. The conclusion, the final lesson. RadioShack tried one final pathetic gasp for air, a co-branding partnership with Sprint, an attempt to turn their dwindling locations into half Sprint stores. It failed. A second bankruptcy followed in 2017, wiping the slate clean. The ultimate irony? The brand name was eventually bought and in a final, absurd betrayal of its DIY roots, resurrected as an online cryptocurrency platform. A bizarre and hollow epilogue. The story of RadioShack is a brutal lesson in business. It wasn't one thing that killed them, it was their inability to transition to modern retail. They were squeezed by Best Buy on price, destroyed by the carriers on product, and finally made irrelevant by Amazon on convenience. They lost their identity. They stopped being the experts, the tinkerer's friend, and became the pushy salesman. They prioritized the Wall Street report over the customer relationship. The red circle is a reminder that in the face of rapid technological change, you must evolve, or you become a memory. It's a chilling monument to the tragic human consequences when corporate leadership loses sight of its core mission. For us at Tech Fails, the legacy of RadioShack is a vital case study. It shows how even the pioneers, the ones who put the first computers in our hands, can fall victim to strategic blindness and the lure of easy, temporary money. So the next time you see that faded logo, take a moment to remember. RadioShack was a gateway to the future. And now, all that remains is the ghostly outline of a promise, a testament to a failure we must never forget.